The book of Joshua tells the story of the Israelites under Joshua's leadership and divine intervention as they cross the Jordan River to move into the land of Canaan. Most of us know that as the promised land. This was the land that God had promised them. And so this book has basically two main divisions. I'm oversimplifying it for the sake of teaching, but it has two main divisions. It has the conquest part of the book in which they go in to take the land, and then there's the settlement part of the book where they go in and settle in the land. And so the conquest is chapters 6 through 12, and the settlement is chapters 13 through 19. So you say, what about the other chapters, Pastor? Well, chapters 1 through 5 are sort of an introduction to the book of Joshua. It tells you what's going on since the last time we caught up with them in the last episode of Deuteronomy. And then chapters 20 through 24 are sort of the conclusion of the book. But relatively speaking, chapters 6 through 19 are where you're going to get most of the action, where you're going to get most of the things that happen as they're conquering the land and settling the land. And then you get an introduction in the beginning and sort of a wrap up of the book of Joshua in chapters 20 through 24. So the book begins, remember, I don't have a lot of time for preliminary. That's why I need you to read for yourself chapters 1 through 4. But the book begins with mention of Moses. Let's go ahead and jump right into Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. Just those two verses for right now. And here's what it says. After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. And he said, Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you to lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River into the land I am giving them. If you read that in ancient Hebrew, it says, Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, now arise. Yeah, that's where arise comes from. Just in case you're wondering, he tells Joshua, Moses' assistant, Moses' right-hand man, Moses' protege, Moses is dead. Now I want you to rise up and take the land that I promised to you. Moses is dead, therefore arise. Moses is, I don't know if we often think about this, but Moses is much more of a significant figure than maybe we've even read into the biblical text, because the fact that God is now telling Joshua, Moses, his assistant, his protege, Joshua learned from Moses. Joshua was Moses' apprentice. He watched Moses talk to God and come back and give the instructions to the people. Joshua spent a whole lot of time with Moses. He was close with Moses. And in the opening the opening words of the book of Joshua, God tells Joshua, who is tight with Moses, Moses is dead. Yeah, you got to understand the significance of that. Don't skip over that. Maybe if we go back to Deuteronomy chapter 34, verses 8 through 12, which is the ending of the book of Deuteronomy, right before you get to Joshua, you get a sense of the significance of Moses. Check it out, what it says in the closing words of the book of Deuteronomy. The people of Israel mourned for Moses on the plains of Moab for 30 days. Until the customary period of mourning was over. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him, doing just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Check this out. There has never been another prophet in Israel like Moses, whom knew the Lord face to face. The Lord sent him to perform all the miraculous signs and wonders in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all his servants and his entire land. With mighty power, Moses performed terrifying acts in the sight of Israel. Let me go back up. Notice the purposeful inflection. There has never been another prophet in Israel like Moses. Yeah, now you feel the weight and the significance of the opening statement in Joshua, because Moses wasn't just some guy. Moses wasn't just some person that Joshua hung out with. As a matter of fact, the text says that there was never another prophet in all of Israel up until that point like Moses. All they knew was Moses. Did you realize that the children of Israel were in slavery for 400 some odd years and nobody came to get them? Nobody listened to their cries. While they were crying out to God, it seemed like God wasn't listening. Have you ever thought about the fact that sometimes when you're crying out to God and it doesn't doesn't seem like God is talking to you, he may be talking to somebody else about the answer to your problem. Okay, some of y'all just missed that, because Israel was crying for years and years and years, and it didn't seem like God was speaking to them. But the problem was they didn't realize that God was on somewhere else on the backside of a desert talking to Moses about being the answer to the problem they were praying out. Can I just give you some encouragement early on in the sermon? Sometimes when God is silent, it might be because God is talking to somebody else about the prayer that you've been praying, so that they can come in your life and be the answer for what you've been struggling with your whole life. Hold on, because God is listening and he always has an answer. So Moses wasn't just some guy. It says he was significant in the life of Israel. He was synonymous with their freedom. He was synonymous with them being delivered. All they knew was Moses. Some of them, I don't know about if you knew about this, but as they wandered around in the desert for 40 years and then the younger generation grew up, some of them, all they knew was Moses. We've never been led by anybody else. We've never had another pastor. Moses was the guy that our parents told us brought us out. Moses was the guy who showed up and stood toe-to-toe with Pharaoh. Moses was the guy who God used to perform miracles. We don't know anything but Moses, and the first words in the book of Joshua are, Moses is dead. Yeah, now you feel the weight, because this is our guy. We didn't know anything else but Moses. But what's significant about those instructions is that Moses' death wasn't just the death of a man, it was the end of an era. Yeah, Moses is gone. And I get that, but it was much bigger than that. Because remember, it says that Moses was significant. Nobody else had ever done the stuff that Moses has done. Imagine a group of people who had been enslaved for 400 plus years. All of a sudden, some guy comes into the scene and starts performing all these miracles. Through Moses, the people of Israel saw God work in ways that they had never seen God work. So it wasn't just about the death of Moses. It was about the end of an era. The book of Joshua is profoundly shaped, watch this, by the spiritual necessity of mourning. Yeah, because something significant has happened. Something significant has been lost. And if you study the opening introductory parts of Joshua, it helps us to understand the spiritual necessity of mourning significant loss. Yeah, it's not just something that we do because it's culturally appropriate. It's a spiritual discipline. As a matter of fact, the instructions to be courageous to Joshua appear 4 times in the opening chapter alone. In chapter 1 alone, God instructs Joshua to be courageous 4 times in just the first chapter. But here's what I noticed as I studied this again, that the instructions to be courageous weren't just a call to have the courage to take the land. The instructions to be courageous were also a charge to have the courage to take time to lament. Many of us, let's be honest, especially in the West, we have neglected this spiritual discipline of taking time to lament and to mourn, because we live in a culture where if somebody dies on Monday, we bury them on Wednesday and we're back to work on Friday. And the whole world around us has kept moving, and we just have to keep moving our feet. And I'm not saying that we don't have to move on. Eventually, God calls Israel to cross the Jordan. But before you do anything, I want you to take time and have the courage, not just to take the land, but have the courage to lament. You've been through some significant loss and trauma, Israel. Okay, let me bring it home. You've been through some significant loss and trauma, Tri-Cities Church. You have lost some things, and let's not downplay the significance of what you've lost. And I need you, God says to Israel, to not just have the courage, because come on now, we always have courage, and we always want God to give us courage and empowerment to have victory, to take the victory lap, to take the land. But what if God is calling you to have courage? What if God is calling me to have courage, not just to take the land, but to take time to slow down and to recognize and acknowledge the significance of what you've lost? Yeah, it's a spiritual discipline. This courage to lament was important because, watch this, the land wasn't going to fix the pain. I'm going to let that marinate for just a second. Because many of us have been taught that if I can just get the next thing, if I can just acquire the next thing, if I get the new job, if I get the raise, if I get married, if I do this, if I can acquire the land, then the loss won't be as significant. God says, no, before I even let you go in to take the land, I need you to have the courage to lament. Watch this, because no matter what I give you after this, unless you take time to have the spiritual discipline to lament and mourn, the land is not going to fix what you lost. Does anybody here know that it doesn't matter how much I get after what I've lost, it's never going to replace the significance of who I lost and the significance of what I lost. And yes, God will continue to bless you as you live on this side of heaven, but he's asking us to have the courage to slow down enough to lament, because the land ain't going to fix your pain. And I need you, he says to Joshua, to have courage. The courage to be sad, to lament, to let all of your tears flow, to lay your head in God's lap and let God soothe you because you've lost something significant. See, we have been taught to instinctively avoid sadness. I mean, we even do this at an early age where we tell our children, don't cry. Suck it up. Big boys and big girls don't cry. And there's an element to where we're trying to teach our children some resilience. But the reality is, many of us who were taught those lessons by the time we became grown adults, we didn't even know how to process loss. And God says, before I give you the land, I want you to have courage. Joshua, I need you to lead these people. But here's the reality. Moses is dead. I need you to rise up, but before you do that, I need you to take time to lament. I think perhaps maybe the reason why we avoid sadness is because sadness is often confused for depression. However, they're not always the same. You can have depression and be sad, and you can be sad and not be depressed. As a matter of fact, sadness, according to experts, normally connects with certain events or moments. I'm sad because X happened. Whereas depression often has multiple or unknown origins. I don't know why I feel this way. Can I encourage you, if you are struggling with depression, go see a professional. Someone who can help you walk through those feelings that you don't know where they're coming from. But in this case, God is encouraging them to be sad because it is connected to a specific event or loss that they can pinpoint. They know why they're in their feelings. Why? Because Moses is dead. See, sadness, actually, and I want to make sure that I keep this clear, I'm not talking about depression. Depression is a clinical issue that I need you to go see someone for. But sadness, on the other hand, can serve us because it's a memorial to what matters to us and what gives us meaning. In other words, we don't have to run away from feelings of sadness that are connected to particular events in our life that we can pinpoint that have triggered a certain set of feelings, because sadness actually serves as a memorial. Sadness says this to you, to your brain and to your body, that what you just lost matters. And the reason why I'm hurt and the reason why I'm sad is because I've had a significant loss. Moses is dead. Moses mattered to the children of Israel. And God says, I need you to take time to mourn and lament something that mattered to you a whole lot. It doesn't matter if it matters to me. As long as it matters to you, take time to lament. He says, I need you to take time to lament. See, in the opening moments of the book of Joshua, Israel, I said this before, is not just mourning Moses, they're also, in a strange way, mourning the fact, watch this, that the journey to liberation is still unfinished. Yeah, because Moses brought them out, but they're still not to the place that God has designed and destined for them as a people. And so we miss Moses, and it's the end of an era, but it's also a trigger to remind them that God is not finished with his liberatory work. I'm wondering, we would just take time to lament some things in the world that God's not finished working on. Yeah, we can lament the work of justice that is unfinished. And we can lament news that is unsettling. We can lament people that are unseen. We can lament treatment that is unfair. We can lament natural disasters that are unpredictable. We can lament sickness that is unpleasant. We can lament politicians that are underhanded. We can lament programs that are underfunded. We can lament people that are unwilling. We can lament churches that are unreasonable. We can lament deaths that go unreported. We can lament souls that remain unrepentant. We can lament the news that's become unreliable. We can lament the tragedy that is unfortunate. We can lament people that are uninformed, and we can lament laws that are unethical. What would happen if we took time to lament the fact that God's work of justice and liberation in this world remains unfinished? And sometimes I wonder if we skip over this part of the text because they weren't just mourning Moses, they were mourning the fact that the work that God started in freeing people was yet unfinished. And I'm wondering, let me ask this question, what if we learn to lament that God's liberatory work in our world remains unfinished? How would that change the way we practiced our faith? One of the things that oftentimes makes me upset is in the middle of all the politicization of COVID and masks and vaccines, there's an undercurrent that continues. Make your decision. I can tell you where I stand. You want to know what I think? Meet me in the parking lot. I'll tell you exactly what I think. But to me, that's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is underneath the undercurrent of all the fighting is a neglect to lament the lives over 700,000 that have been lost because of a virus. Feel how you want to feel about vaccinations and masks, but as a Christian, that should break your heart. Something is wrong when the argument is that's only 1% of the population. What is the threshold of people that have to die before it breaks your heart the way that it breaks God's heart? And the people of Israel weren't just lamenting the fact that Moses died. They were lamenting the fact that God began a good work of liberation and justice and freedom, and it's not yet finished. I wonder if the church would just take time and have the courage to admit and lament that God hasn't used us to his fullest capability of liberating and freeing people, and we ought to be sad about that. We got to be the type of people who have the courage to allow the things that breaks God's heart to also break our heart. It wasn't just Moses. It was the fact that God was doing something and freeing people who had been oppressed for 400 years, and it wasn't finished yet, and they were sad that we haven't made it yet. Which is why it's important that we understand Joshua chapter 4. I'll read Joshua chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. It says, when all the people had crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, now choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Tell them, take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan, carry them out and pile them up at the place where you will camp tonight. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had chosen, one from each tribe of the tribes of Israel, and he told him, go into the middle of the Jordan in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it out on your shoulder, 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And we will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask you, what do these stones mean? And then you can tell them, they remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the ark of the Lord's covenant went across. And these stones, watch this, will stand as a memorial among the people of Israel forever. So now we've skipped ahead. Remember, I need you to do all your reading. We skipped ahead to the fact that God has now called them to cross the Jordan, and he tells Joshua after they've crossed the Jordan, you've got to go back and read it, because he tells the priest to hold up the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, if you remember, represents the presence of God. And as they held up the Ark of the Covenant, the same miracle that he did through Moses in splitting the Red Sea is the same miracle that he did in splitting and moving back the waters of the Jordan. You also have to understand, make sure that you read this, that they were crossing during the season when the river was at its peak, and there was a danger, watch this, of them being swept away by the current of the Jordan River. So much so that God used his presence to make sure, okay, some of y'all feeling where I'm going, that it doesn't sweep you away completely. And then you read in the text that God tells Joshua to the place where the priest walked, carrying the presence of God, in a place that should have swept them away. I need you to get 12 stones. You take those stones from the place that the priest stood, and you cross over the Jordan, and when you set up your camp for the night, I want you to take those 12 stones, and I want you to build a memorial. And what God is showing us is that lamenting and mourning and taking time to create moments of memorial is a spiritual discipline. Before I let you go too far after you've crossed over the thing that you've survived, I need you to stop, and I need you to mourn. I need you to set up a place for them physically, for us proverbially, where you can be reminded of what you've lost, and you can also use that as a way to teach the future generations about the faithfulness of God to carry you through seasons that should have swept you away. He says, grab 12 rocks. So I want to just take a little bit of time to share why memorials, and this is what we're going to do with the rocks. I'll explain it in a moment. But there are 3 reasons why memorials serve a purpose. 3 reasons why I believe God told them, before you go too far, I need you to stop and build a memorial. Number 1, the memorial serves as the place of questions. Remember, he says that when they grab the rocks and you put them there, he says, years from now, I don't know when, but your kids are going to ask questions. How many of you know that one of the reasons why it's important to practice the spiritual discipline of lament and mourning is because it creates a place in your life where you can leave your questions? Questions that may never get answered, but God is providing an opportunity and a space for you to at least be able, without judgment, to bring your questions about the significance of the thing that you've lost. And he says, before you get too far, I need you to build a memorial, because somebody down the line is going to have questions about what happened. And some of you have a lot of questions about what's going on in your life. You got questions about what's been going on in this country, in this world, with the virus, with politics, with hatred. A lot of questions about your own personal life, about your marriage, about your family, about your finances. Am I going to make it? You have all sorts of questions. And a memorial is a place that you set up where you can take your questions, and whether they ever get answered or not, you need a space that is safe enough for you to say, God, I don't know what the heck you're up to, and I got some questions. He says, set the rocks down, because at some point, the future generation is going to have some questions. And there's a place where those questions need to go. That's why I encourage people. I don't know that I have all the answers. I don't know that any of us pastors or elders have all the answers. But the church should be the place where you can at least bring your questions without judgment and say, I don't get this. And the reason why many people run away from the church is because we have positioned ourselves as the place of answers and the place where you can ask no questions. So how are you going to be at a place that has answers, but ain't nobody asking questions? And then the church is synonymous and famous for asking questions of people that they're not asking for themselves. God says, I need you to have, before you go any further, set up a place where questions are welcome. Because God, I don't get why you had to take her. I don't get why you had to take him. I don't get why this is going on. I don't understand why people are fighting. I don't understand this verse in your word. I don't understand why he said that. I don't understand why I have these inclinations. This is the place where you bring your questions. He says, number one, the memorial is a place where questions can be asked. Number two, I believe the memorial is important because it's not only the place of questions, it's a place of context. Because you notice that God says, I need you to set up this memorial because for future generations, it's going to provide for them the context of how I worked in their lives. See, so many of us don't even understand the context of our loss and our grief and our mourning and the ways that God has worked. Remember, I talked about having hindsight, and then I talked about having insight, and then I talked about having foresight. Sometimes we need to do that even with the things that we've lost. Why? Because it provides context. Yeah, when people stand up and look at me and say, man, you look blessed, you got it going on. Yeah, but you don't know the context. You don't know all the stuff that I've lost. Anybody else have that story in here? Yeah, I'm standing. Yeah, I look healthy. Yeah, I look like I'm doing good. But let me give you some context. There's a whole lot of stuff that I've lost in my life that God has worked with me through. So to make sure that I didn't totally get swept away. And the memorial is not just a place of questions, it's a place of context. He says, your kids are going to know what I've done in your life and what you've lost and how you navigate it and see the greatness of God working in your life. And the memorial serves as a place where you can give some context to your story. I want to give you just a couple of things that I think will help you to understand the context even of your particular loss. Now, I've taught this before, but it's good to teach again. This comes from a book that I read years ago called All Our Losses and Grief. And it gives you the 6 different types of loss. Why am I sharing this? So you can get some context to what you're struggling with. First type of loss is material loss. It is the loss of a physical object or a familiar surrounding to which one has an important attachment. So it could be like the sale of a home or clothing, or if you lost someone and you had to get rid of their things. Those are material things, but they have significance to you. And even having to get rid of those things is an additional loss to the loss of your loved one. It could be due to death, but it could also be due to moving away, getting a new job. Anything could force material loss. And the items are symbolic in many ways, and they are sacred to you. And it can be a source of additional layers of grief. Second type of loss is relationship loss. Relationship loss is the ending of opportunities to relate oneself to, talk with, share experiences with, touch, settle issues with, and otherwise be in an emotional or physical presence of a particular other human being. Now you got some context. That's what I'm feeling. Oftentimes it could be the result of death, but sometimes not. And this type of loss is most often the first type of loss we experience as children when a friend moves away or when you get moved to a different class that your friend is not in. And it's not always permanent. However, death is the most intense form of relationship loss. What may be required in this type of loss is the sorting of memories or memorials so that you can carry on an internal dialogue with yourself and with God about what you have lost. You with me? Third type of loss is intrapsychic loss. Intrapsychic loss is the experience of losing an emotionally important image of oneself and losing the possibilities of what might have been. It's an abandonment of plans for a particular future, the dying of a dream, if you will. And although it's often related to external experiences, it is itself an entirely inward experience. This loss is usually not experienced until adolescence because it requires a keen level of self-awareness. And this loss is unique because it's completely internal. It's a loss of what might have been if that didn't happen. And it is the loss of how it impacts how you see yourself because of what happened, and what might have been is no longer a possibility, and it changes the way you even see yourself. Fourth type of loss is functional loss. This is simply the loss of muscular or neurological functions. And I share this because oftentimes it can be a comorbidity of loss. Sometimes when you've lost something significant, your mind don't act right. And your body doesn't do the stuff that you want it to do. Don't downplay functional loss. It's that moment where when your legs start hurting or your head starts hurting, and oftentimes it's a result of a particular loss, but that in and of itself is a loss. The loss of independence, the loss of being able to do the stuff that I used to do. Many people who have had COVID have said, I have experienced some cognitive changes. I can't focus as much as I used to. That's something that needs to be grieved. The fifth type of loss is called role loss. Role loss is a loss of a specific social role or one's accustomed place in a social network. Many times people who retire or change a job, that's a frequent occasion of role loss. It can also occur, obviously, with death. And the significance of role loss is directly related to one's sense of identity that is linked to that role. If you've lost a child and now you are a mother or father that's lost your child, your role used to be as a parent, and now that your child is gone, you're trying to figure out what your role is in society. If you've lost a spouse, your role has been as a husband or a wife, and that loss in and of itself is significant, but you're also grieving the role that has now changed. That's why when you go out and you see couples celebrating Valentine's Day, or you see children with their parents on Mother's Day or Father's Day, it triggers something because there's a role that's been lost. Yes, it's awful that you lost that person, but you also lost that role. It gives context to what you're dealing with. Here's the last one: systemic loss. Systemic loss is a loss of systems that facilitate comfortable patterns of behavior. What does that mean, Pastor? That when you experience loss, sometimes it changes the way you have to operate. And there was a habit and a routine and a system that, come on now, all of us, I can say this, I don't know all your stories, but all of us since March of last year have experienced systemic loss. Because the way you used to do stuff doesn't work anymore, and now I have to, come on now, if you're like me, I had a routine that I've had for 10 years, for 15 years, for 20 years, and then all of a sudden somebody comes or some circumstance comes and takes that away. Don't minimize the significance. It has changed the way that you've had to do life, and you're also grieving that. So not only is the memorial place of questions, it's also the place of context. I gave you 6 things that help you provide context. Here's the last thing. It is the place of questions, it is a place of context, but it's also, a memorial is also the place of crossing. It is the place that God has told his children, here's where I want you to build this memorial to remind you. Remember, he says right outside, I want you to build a camp right outside the Jordan where you crossed over the things that should have swept you away. And I want you to stop and build a memorial because this is the place where you're going to be able to cross over the things that try to sweep you away. See, the place of crossing means that placing the stones is a corporate or spiritual practice that is the place God called them to cross and to remember the river of life's problems and how they haven't completely swept you away. They tried, but remember, the priests took the presence of God and walked through something that should have swept them away, and God says, this is a place where you cross. So I don't know your story, but I want you, as we prepare to bring these rocks, to find that place within your heart where you can recognize that God gave you some stepping stones. Did I tell you that they took the stones from the places that the priests stepped on as they walked through the Jordan? My question is is what stepping stones has God given you, or what stepping stones do you need for God to help you to cross over the place that's trying to sweep you away? He says, I need you to stop and take the stones from there so that you can recognize that this is a place of crossing. I want to just share two people that I'm going to lay my stone for, and there's many others. And if you haven't got your stone, they're in the back. You can do this. You can choose to write the person or the issue or whatever it is that you want to lay as a memorial. And we're going to come forward just a second and lay our stones on the altar or the steps. You can write if you choose to, but if it's personal for you and you don't want anyone to see it, just know that you are laying it as a memorial for something that you have lost, and you and God know. So you don't have to write on it. But if you want to, as an act of significance, you can write on that stone. It can be a person. It could be anything that you've lost. But before we do it, I want to share, just throw those pictures up for me. This is my friend Howard. Howard died just a little over a week ago from complications from COVID. You notice that's right outside my office. So Howard was a friend of this church, even though you've never met Howard. Howard was a great friend that I met through Jamie, and we've been friends for the last almost 3 years. And Howard was just an incredible guy who served everyone. I mean, you can see, even in that picture, the kind of relationship that we had. And while this is not an exhaustive list of all the things that we've lost, I'm going to lay my stone this morning to remember Howard and how God used him to help me cross over some difficult things. Go to the next. This woman right here is affectionately known as Miss Fran. Now, Miss Fran was a member of my previous church, and Miss Fran was like a second mother to me. And she died last year, and I did her funeral at the very beginning of COVID, so we had to do it outside. But Miss Fran was the type of woman, let me tell you about Miss Fran. Miss Fran, every year, would make sure that we had our dressing and all the fixings for Thanksgiving. All we had to do was get the turkey. She would call me and say, Pastor Lamar, I need you to come up here and get all your food. And she would give us like a whole laundry room full of big bottles of Tide just because somebody had given her in bulk. Here, take 3 or 4 of these and make sure you get something for the boys. And she would often, in my last church, come up to the office unannounced just to bring me lunch. She was like a mother to me. This is our last day at my previous church. Go ahead and show the last one. And Miss Fran died of cancer. Here's why this is a struggle for me. Because 2 of the people, and this is why I'm talking about them, 2 of the people that I'm laying my rock for are people who had the same thing that I had. And somehow they didn't make it. And I'm not foolish enough to ever think that I'm special and that God loved me more as to why I made it out of my cancer battle and I made it out of COVID. So even underneath that, there's a significant sense of loss called survivor's guilt. Some of us are sitting here and we've made it through some stuff that other people didn't make it. And for me, it's a place of question. God, I know so many other people who are far more worthy than I am to still be here, and they're not. And I don't know how I feel about that, and I have a lot of questions about that, and I'm lamenting and I'm mourning that. So what I want you to do is prepare your rock. You can start writing on it now. Band, you can come back up because we're getting ready to take communion. And as the band begins to play and sing, after you take your communion, if you haven't received your communion, just raise your hand. Someone can bring you one. If you don't have a rock, raise your hand. Someone can bring you one. If you have difficulty getting down to the stage and you feel comfortable with it, you can hand your rock to someone else and they can lay it for you. But I don't know if you know this, but Jesus also pointed to the significance of memorials. This is not on the screen. This is Luke chapter 22, verses 14 through 20. Luke says, when the time came, Jesus and the apostles sat down together at the table, and Jesus said, I have been very eager to eat this Passover meal with you before my suffering begins. For I will tell you now that I won't eat this meal again until its meaning is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Then he took the cup of wine and gave thanks to God for it. Then he said, take this and share it among yourselves, for I will not drink wine again until the kingdom of God has come. And then he took some bread and gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, this is my body, for which, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And after the supper, he took another cup of wine and said, this cup is a new covenant between God and his people, and an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for you. Did you catch what he says? Do this in remembrance, as a memorial. Something that was a regular part of their spiritual discipline, observing the Passover. He says, now I want you to attach some new meaning to it. I want you to have the courage to take time, that every time you do this, you're doing this as a memorial to me, so that you can remember that I gave my body and my blood, so that you can cross over the things of life that have tried to sweep you away, and that you know that eternally you are secure and you are safe. And so I'm going to pray. The band's going to come and they're going to sing. Take your communion, and then as you feel led, you can bring your stone and lay it on the altar as your memorial to whatever or whoever you have lost. God, we thank you so much for this opportunity.